We complain when the room slips below 68 and the Wi-Fi freezes for 3 seconds. But in the 14th century, Thomas had bigger problems. It's late autumn, the last harvest, before the snow seals the fields. Rain turns to sleet, sleet turns to needles of ice, and Thomas marches home through the mud, every layer soaked from linen to wool. No central heating, no dry socks, no spare outfit, just winter. And here's the real punch. If he doesn't follow the old warming ritual, tonight hypothermia isn't a possibility, it's a countdown. So how do you stay warm when every single layer on your body is dripping 5 survival tricks? A cow for heat, hot stones in the bed, straw that breathes. By sunrise, his clothes will still be damp, but he won't be cold. Thomas pushes open the wooden door, and the heat from the hearth brushes his face like a tired friend. Steam lifts from his clothing the moment he steps inside. The floor is packed earth with a thin layer of straw, just like archaeologists have documented in medieval peasant homes across England. The room is dim, smoky, and heavy with the smell of wet wool. This little hearth is the only thing standing between his family and the kind of cold that steals strength hour by hour. Every layer on his body is soaked. Linen shirt, wool tunic, cloak. Even his hose cling to his legs like cold vines. And in the 14th century, a peasant like Thomas rarely owned spare clothing. Evidence from medieval villages such as Warham, Percy, suggests that peasant families owned very few everyday outfits, often just 1 or 2 sets of clothes for regular use. If he keeps these wet layers on his body, we'll lose heat faster than the fire can replace it. Hypothermia doesn't wait for permission. But the people before him learned something simple and brilliant. You don't need everything dry, you just need to slow down the heat loss. And the first 10 minutes after coming in from the cold are the golden window. Miss that window, and the night becomes a long, dangerous gamble. So Thomas moves fast. He strips off the soaked cloak by the door and hangs it near the fire high enough to catch warm air, but far enough to avoid stray sparks. His linen stays on because slightly damp linen still insulates better than bare skin. He squeezes water from the sleeves and hem, letting it drip into the straw. His wife wraps a heavy wool blanket around his shoulders, trapping a pocket of warm air against his chest. He pulls off his wet shoes, stuffs dry straw inside to absorb moisture, and rests his feet near a warm stone beside the hearth. And just like that, the bleeding heat finally slows. His body begins to recover, the shaking stops, surviving the first 10 minutes. But his clothes are still wet. So how does a medieval peasant stay warm when the wool itself is dripping? The secret is in the material. Thomas sits close to the hearth, letting the heat seep back into his bones. His wool tunic and cloak hang above him, dripping slowly. The fibers release a faint mist as the warm air rises. And this detail is not fantasy. Textile studies suggest that medieval wool garments in England still contained much of their natural lanolin, meaning peasants were working with wool that naturally resisted water. Even when wet, it didn't collapse the way cotton does today. Modern thinking says if your clothes are wet, you're done. Heat loss skyrockets. Wet linen clings to the skin and pulls warmth out like a thief in the night. And that part is true. Linen absorbs water fast. That's why it was used as an underlayer, not the main insulator. If wool behaved the same way, Thomas wouldn't stand a chance. But it didn't. Generations before him figured out that wool keeps insulating even when damp. The lanolin coating and crimped fibers trap tiny pockets of air, slowing down heat loss. Water stays mostly on the outside of the fiber, rather than soaking into the core. Medieval textiles recovered from digs show this exact structure. It's biology meeting survival. So Thomas works with what he has. He keeps the linen on if it's only lightly damp, because linen wicks moisture off the skin faster than going bare. He squeezes as much water as he can from the wool tunic, then slips it back on. It still feels heavy, still feels miserable, but it remains his thermal armor. His wife drapes a drier wool blanket over his shoulders, building a second warm air pocket. Above the hearth, the cloak hangs at the highest point, right where hot smoke collects. That was a real medieval drying trick. Let the smoke and heat work for you. Wet wool isn't cozy, but it still insulates, and it buys you hours. Hours matter, but clothing is only half the battle. The real fight happens where the cold attacks from below. Night falls and the wind claws at the wooden shutters like an animal trying to get in. Thomas looks toward the sleeping corner. To a modern eye, it's nothing more than a pile of straw, a few hides, and several stones heating near the fire. But archaeologists studying medieval homes from Warham Percy to York found this exact setup. It wasn't just a bed, it was a horizontal furnace built from whatever a peasant family could gather before winter locked down the countryside. Wet clothes he can manage, damp wool still holds heat, but the ground is a different beast. Medieval floors were packed earth cold as a river stone, and they pulled heat out of a human body fast, like lying on a giant cold slab. If Thomas lies straight on that floor, the cold will drain him in minutes. People in his world discovered a brutally simple rule: if you can't make yourself warmer, at least stop the earth from stealing what's left. The floor became their second line of defense, and every layer mattered. The first layer is dry straw, spread thick. Excavations across medieval England show layers of straw or rushes on cottage floors renewed regularly because they trapped pockets of air and slowed heat loss better than bare soil. On top of that comes the straw tick, a cloth sack stuffed with more straw, or sometimes a thin wooden plank when families could afford it. Then, the hides fur side up. Studies of surviving hides confirm the fur layer kept warm air close to the body, even when the room itself was icy cold. Finally, the secret weapon: stones or bricks heated in the hearth, wrapped in cloth, then tucked near the feet or lower back. Bed warmers like these show up across Europe, and they work. The heat bleeds out slowly, raising the temperature in that tiny pocket under the blanket. The earth is still freezing. The snow still falls. But Thomas is no longer losing heat. Ground defeated. But straw and stones can only do so much. The strongest warmth in this house is alive, moving, and breathing right beside him. Thomas isn't alone in this house. At the far end, behind a wooden partition no thicker than a grown man's hand, stand the family's most reliable heaters: a cow, 2 sheep, and a pig that snorts every few minutes. Archaeologists studying medieval longhouses in northern England and Scotland found this exact layout. Humans on one side, animals on the other, sharing one roof, one airspace, one winter. And tonight, their breath is part of the plan. Even with the fire burning low, even with the warm stones tucked near his feet, Thomas's damp clothes still bleed heat. A single peasant in a wide room can't create enough warmth to build a microclimate, but pack living things together in a tight space, and the temperature rises a few degrees. It's the same principle penguins use in Antarctica. Peasants learned it long before the science had a name, so the family forms their nightly shield wall. Thomas's mother settles in the center. The children curl beside her like small embers. Thomas and his wife take the outer ring, shoulders touching arms wrapped around whoever is coldest. Ethnographers documenting traditional peasant households describe very similar sleeping arrangements. It wasn't affection, it was engineering. The warmest bodies in the middle, the strongest on the outside. A human Tetris block working against the cold. And just beyond them, separated by a lattice of wood, the animals breathe slow clouds of warm air. Studies of Scandinavian longhouses show that livestock could raise the indoor temperature on winter nights by a few degrees. Not much, but enough to buy a family time. Every breath helps. Even the dog stretched near Thomas's feet adds a little heat and a little warning in case anything prowls the night. The room is still damp. The clothes are still not dry, but no one is shivering anymore. Pack warmth. But straw, wool, and livestock aren't the final key. The thing that truly keeps a medieval family alive is something living inside their minds. The fire has burned down to a quiet bed of embers, the kind that glows more than it flickers. Most of the house is asleep now, slow breaths, soft rustling under blankets and hides. Thomas lies there with his clothes still damp in places, but the danger has passed. His body has leveled out. He's warm enough to rest, even if nothing about this room feels comfortable by modern standards. Here's the part most of us today get wrong. When we feel cold and wet at the same time, our brains hit the panic button. We treat it like something has gone horribly off script. But for medieval peasants, this wasn't a crisis. It wasn't even unusual. Winter was expected, predicted, trained for. In Thomas's village, winter wasn't an emergency. It was a syllabus. Families spent years refining their cold weather routines, not because they were obsessed with comfort, but because repetition and memory were survival tools. Archaeological studies of medieval villages show patterns of seasonal labor that repeat year after year. People knew when to harvest, when to gather fuel, when to set up drying racks, and when to start the winter watch rotations. Preparation wasn't a luxury. It was life insurance. So the household follows its winter script. Wet clothes never hang just anywhere. Many homes likely had a drying corner near the hearth, and medieval house reconstructions based on excavations across England often include one. Each family member has a job. Someone tends the fire. Someone turns the wool garments so they dry evenly. Someone shakes out the straw bedding and replaces what's damp. Someone heats the stones for the night. Even the children carry winter lessons. Ethnographers studying pre-industrial Europe describe how kids learned from the time they could walk, how close to stand to the fire, how to check if a heated stone is safe, how to avoid sweating in the cold because sweat was the real thief of warmth. Each winter added another trick to the family's memory bank. No panic, no wasted energy, no dying from the same mistake twice. Calm survives, and that mindset is the bridge between them and us. Because in the modern world, winter isn't always weather. Sometimes it's a job loss, a bad month, a crisis you didn't see coming. The more you treat it as a season, you can prepare for the better your chances of walking out of the other side. And that brings us to the final lesson of the night. Morning comes soft and gray. The fire has collapsed into ash. The house still smells of damp wool and smoke, but Thomas wakes steady. No fever, no shaking. He pulls on the same clothes, not fully dry, yet warm enough to face another day in the fields. The system worked. And that's the real lesson. Medieval survival wasn't about perfect gear. It was about a repeatable system. Fire fades, stones cool, straw breaks down, but knowledge travels light. It weighs nothing, and it saves everything. So here's your question. Could you make it through one winter night like Thomas wet clothes? No backup outfit, just fire straw and a cow humming warmth in the corner. How many hours do you think you'd last? Tell me in the comments. And if you want more field-tested survival wisdom from medieval peasants, Vikings, and hunter cultures across the world, hit subscribe. The next episode is coming. And winter isn't done yet.